one of the early things that I think I want to do is, one, to begin again the process that was started by Professor Tamils in respect of the constitutional review. It stalled at a certain point, and for the last 8 years, we haven't moved it anywhere. I think that the time has come for us to look at our constitution again. It has served us well, and I still believe it's one of the best constitutions any African country can have. But after using it for several years, we realized that there are a few parts that we need to tweak so that it can serve us for even further generations to come. Okay. And so one of the things that I intend to do is to hold a national validation conference where we would bring all stakeholders in a form of consultative assembly. The legal people will know how to phrase it so that we can move it forward. Now what we want to do is to bring the constitutional review report back to this validation conference. There might be things that we flagged that we wanted to amend that might not be necessary again this time. And then by the new things that we didn't really take notice of, that will become important for us to include in the review. I mean, for instance, if you take the impasse between Parliament and the judiciary, nobody anticipated that a situation like this would arise. But once it's arisen, we must clearly state what the mandate of the Speaker is, so that it's unambiguous, so that nobody has to go to the Supreme Court to seek interpretation about what the Speaker's role is when vacancies occur. So these are some of the things that I think a validation conference like that will help to streamline. And once we've done that, we can separate the two amendments. We have the entrenched clauses and we have the non-entrenched clauses. The non-entrenched clauses are easy to pass because it just has to do with Parliament. And so once we all build a consensus around the non-entrenched clauses, we can send them directly to Parliament. The entrenched clauses are going to be more difficult, but we need to build a consensus around them. They are more difficult to amend because you need Parliament to validate it, and then you need to go for a referendum to the people. And I believe that if you look at the standards that our Constitution sets for those referenda, no one party can pass through any such amendment. And so we need to build a consensus with our colleagues, you know, a bipartisan consensus with our colleagues on the political field, and get also the support of the civil society, the traditional rulers, the religious leaders, to be able to move those amendments forward.
Elect John Dramani Mahama. So Clara is going to take us through explaining. She's the chairperson of this committee that just submitted its report to the president, who has assured that he's going to forward to President Mahama and also make his own notes to him, and look forward to a broader consultative process to conclude on it. But before Clara does that, the Honorable Osei Che Mensah Bonsu joins us. Thanks very much for making time to join us, sir.
Thank you for having me once again.
Right. So he had executive oversight of this process, the Constitution Review Consultative Committee. But before Clara does the presentation and then he tells us why this is important in the first place, that he committed his ministry to, let's hear him on this collation and collation brouhaha, briefly.
Well, thank you, Samson. I wouldn't want to swim against the tide. The Supreme Court has come out with their ruling on the matter as to the way forward for us. Whether or not you agree or don't agree, you must tolerate it and live with it. That's where we are, and that is the essence of the rule of law. I would think that what determination that they've made for us as a country provides us with some headway. The collaging and recollation of the votes before a final determination is made by the Electoral Commission. I've heard people make comments about that, and I've lived with this. 2020, my own constituency, the EC was about doing the collation. I had indicated to them that I was doing my own collation. I will start. And in fact, they told me that we're going to start at 9. I got there at 9:15, and they had started. and done in the night, and done about 50% of it. So it was a bit of a tussle between me and the EC officers. We began from afresh, subsequent to what I had indicated, that I was strongly against what they had done. And so we began afresh. So they had done the calculation of the arithmetic of it up to about 50%. Because at the time we had not had all the pink sheets delivered to both us as political parties and even the EC themselves. And then what they had done, and there's a young man, I was quite close to him, the EC officer. They had done the calculation of the figures. When we started afresh, where they had got into, and I got to know that when we got there, we got to know that something funny had happened. That I had been shortchanged by about 3,500. And it had been credited to my opponent. Same thing had happened to Akufo-Addo and President Mahama, who was at the time contesting. Was it deliberate, or was it not? I mean, let's face it. As for additions, we can get it wrong.
That's right.
So perhaps it wasn't deliberate, but perhaps it was also deliberate. And I think that it was deliberate because when we were still waiting and the man excused us, said he wanted to use the washroom, 15 minutes he wasn't coming, and then we needed to continue. We went there and found him. He was sitting on the ground and he was sobbing profusely.
The EC returning officer?
I don't want to mention his name. And I knew the political leaning of that person. And yet, because we had been together for quite a while, I was taking care of the guy's school fees at university. And yet, that's what happened. As to whether it was deliberate or not, I cannot tell. But the fact that I caught him and he was sobbing tells me something. So these are matters that, I mean, human as we are, I think we need to find a way about them. But as I've said, the Supreme Court have made a determination.
Right.
Let whatever ought to be done before the closure. All that we need to know is the truth. That the truth is finally established. Who won? One person may win, certainly, but it must be done and be done rightly. I do know, for instance, that Obuasi East at the very outset was part of it.
That's right.
The guy had won by a very narrow margin, I knew. I had brought the pink sheets to us. He had won by 22. When they did the recollation, the number came down to 19. But he has still won. Why would anybody say that we will not allow the recollation to happen? Why? And then people say that, oh, let's go and mass up and prevent them from doing whatever. Is it necessary? Or perhaps has the time come for us to resort to electronic voting? If we're doing this, all these directing people to go and mass up at some places would not even be necessary anyway.
All right.
But we need to improve on our circumstances.
So we keep to the resolution and the path as provided by the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
That's what he's saying. And for those who have the fears that, well, if you allow the declaration to stand, one person will be sworn in, and the other person who will challenge the election, it may take them forever or the entire life of the parliament before they may be declared a winner. That is not going to happen this time, because for a period now, these cases are going to be heard by dedicated courts. They hear only these cases and no other cases, and they do it on a daily basis, and the cases are supposed to be dispensed with dispatch. So those fears should be done away with.
On Saturdays.
Yes, Saturdays and holidays.
The Chief Justice intended to bring a constitutional instrument. He couldn't bring it because of what was happening in Parliament.
That's right.
And that is one of the things that we should be regretting. That Parliament, by their conduct, did not enable the Chief Justice to submit that constitutional instrument. You remember at the bar conference?
Yes, she assured that was going to happen.
That it was going to happen. And yet because of the raucous development...
And that constitutional instrument is intended to abridge the time for hearing parliamentary election petitions.
Yes.
Where the turnaround time will not be more than 3 months. Okay, so now let's go to Clara, the chairperson of the Constitutional Review Consultative Committee, and get to understand what it is that they have done.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to be as brief as I can. What I seek to do in this presentation is 4 things. We'll give a very brief historical background, an introduction of the committee, then a little bit about the process, the strategy, approach, and methodology of the committee, and then some of the key recommendations. We can't say all of them, but we'll give some key highlights and then our recommendation on the way forward. So on the brief historical background, as we all already know, we had our independence in 1956, but it was not until 1960 that we became a republic. So we had our first Republican constitution in 1960, but it lasted just 6 years. So from 60 to 66, that first republic ended. It means we had a coup d'etat. And then again, we went back, we had a second Republican constitution in 1969. We came back to democracy. That one lasted just 3 years. So from 69 to 72, just about 3 years. And then, of course, that democratic dispensation was disturbed again. So we had another coup d'etat. And then we eventually had a third republic. So in the third republic, that was 1979. It is the shortest period in our history. It's less than 3 years. It is less than 3 years. Before eventually we went for quite a while before we eventually went back to democratic rule in through the 1992 Constitution.
But you meant to say that the 1979 one lasted a little over a year, not 3 years.
I said it was shorter than 3 years. Okay, yes.
That's more than 2 years.
Yes,
okay.
It was shorter than 3 years.
Okay.
It was shorter than 3 years, yes. So now the fourth Republican Constitution is secured by the 1992 Constitution. So we've since had the Fourth Republic, which came into force in 1993, and it has continued for over 3 decades. It has seen now, if we add these elections, 9 democratically elected presidents and 9 parliaments. It has also witnessed a transfer of smooth and peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another political party. This constitution has survived the passing of a sitting president, and then power transited smoothly again. Again, this constitution has witnessed for the first time where we had a speaker who is not a member of the government. And the republic survived it. And then, so in short, the point I am trying to make is that we cannot run away from the fact that the 1992 Constitution has been our most resilient constitution.
Yeah.
So there is certainly something about it.
Yes.
And one of the things about that constitution is the fact that it was the constitution that was passed at a referendum, adult suffrage, and it had over 92% voting yes. So there is something in a document like that that has survived and continues to survive different scenarios, different circumstances, and it is still carrying us through. That is not to say that it is perfect. As we just heard the president-elect say, we've practiced this for some time, so we also see aspects that are in need of improvements. So there is a basis for proposed amendments. And these bases include the fact that we need improvements in certain aspects of the Constitution, and we also want to deepen democracy and the democratic principles that we practice. So in short, we had the minister responsible for parliamentary affairs who put together, who wrote to certain institutions to nominate persons onto a committee for purposes of taking another look at the Constitution, and also the CRC work that was done. As we know, the major work since the 1992 Constitution with respect to review of the Constitution was the CRC's report, the work that through Professor J.E.A. Mills, the Constitution Review Commission is the first major work step taken towards a review of the Constitution. But we all know that it did not end up in an amendment. And that report was in 2011. So the process was revived again because we have to agree, as you heard the president-elect as well, that time has passed. Things have changed. So we needed to revisit those recommendations and also see what the way forward in terms of amending the Constitution. So the minister responsible for parliamentary affairs put together institutions, and these institutions nominated their own persons. So they nominated their own representatives onto the Constitution. The effect was that we had a very diverse, inclusive, and independent committee. The interesting thing was that when the committee eventually assembled, we realized that we had someone from the consultative assembly, the consultative assembly that produced the 1992 Constitution, and certain people who had worked with the CRC as well, and then senior citizens as well, and then of course young people as well. So the mandate of the committee, or the terms of reference for the committee, was one to review the Constitution Review Commission's report of 2011. After this report, there were a lot of stakeholder submissions, over 60 of them. Over 65 stakeholders made proposals with respect to amendment of the Constitution. So we also reviewed those stakeholder submissions. Submissions were also made on various constitutional review platforms. And then, of course, part of the TOR included to make recommendations to the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and its partners and collaborators, and then submit a report on suggestions of firm resolve for a review of the Constitution. Now, what strategy did the committee adopt? First was that the committee decided that we will not redo or undo what the CRC did, but rather we would build on what the CRC did and then include changes that may have occurred since the 12 years ago when the CRC report was authored. So to do this, the committee adopts the CRC recommendations where same is not overtaken by events, harmonizes the CRC report with the government white paper, and as well as the over 65 submissions received, and then consider whether there are more efficient ways to achieve the same objective. And then, of course, once we consider all of this, we then made recommendations. Now, the approach that the committee adopted was a clause-by-clause consideration of the entire Constitution, vis-a-vis what I just talked about, the CRC report, the stakeholder submissions that I just talked about. So we go clause by clause, and in measuring the clause by clause, we had certain underpinning values. And these underpinning values were liberty, equality of opportunity, prosperity, inclusion, respect for diversity, freedom and justice, accountability, rule of law, protection and preservation of human rights, unity of our nation, stability of our nation, sovereignty of the people of Ghana, respect for our cultural heritage, friendship and peace with all peoples of the world, and then other democratic values. So in terms of the recommendations that we make, these are the underpinning values. We also took the approach that constitutions are broad frameworks rather than manuals. This is because there were a lot of stakeholder submissions that wanted certain details included in constitution, but that's not the nature of constitutions. So we had to bear in mind the nature of constitutions when we were making the recommendation. But the entire objective at the end of the day was to ensure that this report reflects who we are as a people, so it reflects a certain Ghanaian identity, where we are 12 years on since the CRC report, where we want to be in our democratic journey, and then the aim or the objective was to recommend a constitutional framework that puts us in a position to pursue the Ghanaian aspiration for democracy. The process, briefly on the process that we undertook, it was a comparative process, so there were a lot of meetings, physical, residential, virtual, a lot of analysis. We received briefs, analyzed other reports, held validation workshops with several entities, national, international, some included CSOs, traditional, ordinary citizens, retired Superior Court judges, current parliamentarians, retired parliamentarians, private citizens, business people. We participated in validation workshops with these groups of people so that at least the recommendations that we make, they could give us feedback and their perspectives on it. The committee also had certain guiding principles, and these principles were: 1, does it belong in the Constitution or it belongs in an act, regulation, political party constitution, or other document? Then 2, people made suggestions. We look at the suggestion and we look at the current provision. Does the current provision achieve the effect? If the current provision achieves the effect, there is no reason to disturb the current provision. We leave it as it is. And then number 3, for the suggestions that were made, we consider, is it consistent with the clear values of the Constitution? If it is not consistent with the clear values of the Constitution, there is no need to take it on board then, or add it, or it should be modified to reflect the values of the Constitution. Now, what was the scope of the committee? We limited ourselves to the 1992 Constitution in terms of the recommendations. So that means that we were not making recommendations for other pieces of legislation like Acts of Parliament or CIs or other administrative requirements. So this is in brief, this is the procedure or the process that we use to come out with the recommendations that we are now going to look at. So now let's look at a sample of the key recommendations. The first one is the procedure for amendment. We are aware that the CRC recommendation was to group them in the 2, the entrenched and then the not entrenched, but all of them would be in one bill. What it means is that if you were going to have a total of 30 entrenched clauses that were going for a referendum, you vote yes or no for the 30. Now, the committee took the view that if you do this, you are more or less railroading, considering that the 1992 Constitution itself was voted for at a referendum. So if the people said that for these particular provisions, if you want to change them, come back to us, we must do likewise. So the recommendation was that after at the end of the day, we consider which proposed amendments fall within entrenched and non-entrenched provisions, and then pursue them accordingly. So for the ones that fall within entrenched provisions and so require a referendum, the committee's recommendation is that the proposed amendment must be grouped under the applicable subject matter and relevant consequential amendments and pursued separately in separate individual bills. In short, if you want to look at a particular subject matter, look at that subject matter, allow people to vote separately whether they want it or not. Let's take an example is just the aborted referendum, which was for the election of MMNDCs. We realized that whilst people wanted to elect their MMDCs, they didn't want to elect them on partisan lines. So you give people a choice if they understand it and they decide that this is what they want. So the proposal is that group them separately and then allow each proposed bill to be voted for. So the persons can vote separately for each bill. If they like this, they vote yes. If they don't like this one, they vote no. Rather than put all of them together where they may like 5 and then they don't like 5. If you put the 10 together and they're supposed to vote, then what are they supposed to vote for? Yes or no? Because they like 5, but they don't like the other 5. The committee's view is that this gives the people of Ghana the opportunity to reflect on the effect of each amendment and decide whether or not they want that specific amendment. The benefits would be a real opportunity for individual reflection and then decision on each bill. For the ones that fall within non-entrenched provisions, it's much easier as we know. So this one, since it is Parliament that would be dealing with that, Parliament can decide how they want to proceed with it, whether they want to proceed just like the ones for referendum or they want to proceed differently. A third recommendation was, of course, what the CRC recommended, which is do all of them in one bullet bill. But our recommendation is, at the end of the day, as we noted, we go for the popular consensus, let the people decide which they think really works for them. So now, if you are going by the first one, which we talked about doing separate bills, you must have a priority list for consideration. So what the committee also did was to seek to look at what a priority list would be, because you would need to decide which of the provisions you want to pursue at what time. So the recommended priority list includes one that we look at the caps, to cap the appointment of ministers of state, and then also, which of course would go with capping the constituencies in Ghana. Also look at the appointment of ministers from parliament. Of course, that the president must pay tax, election of MMDCs, and then emoluments and conditions of service of selected government officials. That is the Article 71 holders. We also, the sixth is to look at appointments of independent constitutional bodies such as the EC, NCCE, SHRAJ, and then the provisions on the declaration of assets, the National Development Planning Commission, functions of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, and then fundamental human rights. So these were the priority lists that we looked at. Now, considering, of course, so we are going to do the selected recommendations. As I noted, we can't talk about everything within this. You
have a priority list on which you have John Mahama proposing that he would also want to scrap ex gratia. Yes. Interesting.
Exactly.
Let's go on.
Exactly. So we give the priority list. The president-elect can say that this is the one I want to prioritize. And then take a look at. So let's look at the key recommendations that we make. Now, so in this, we are putting the two key reports side by side so that we see where the changes are. If you take the issue about appointment of ministers, which is dealt with in Article 78(2). Now, if you look at the CRC recommended that we should leave it open for the president to appoint, which means that the president can appoint as many as the president wants. Now, the CRC has taken a different view, in the sense that the CRCC says that, no, let's not leave it open to the president to appoint as many as the president wants. Let's cap it. So the proposal that the CRCC gave, as something noted earlier on, was that the president should not appoint more than 25. But when we went for the stakeholder engagement, which included the two main political parties and more, all other political parties, they all said that they will not agree to the 25. But they would be willing to reach a consensus of 55. So they proposed a consensus. They agreed in principle that let's cap the president's power to appoint the number of ministers. But they disagreed with us on the number. We are asking 25. We say 25 is fine. They are asking for a consensus of 55. But they agree to the cap. Now, secondly, and
I remember Samokujeto.
Yes.
The Venerable Samokujeto insisting that they should also not come from parliament.
Yes, we are coming to that one too.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. So now, if you look at the number of MPs, for example, the CRCC did not recommend a cap. Again, the CRC did not recommend a cap, but the CRCC recommends a cap. We are saying that let's not just cap the president's power of appointing ministers. Let's also cap the number of parliamentarians. Let's cap parliament. So we proposed a cap of 277. Now, let me give a reason. The reason is that we already have 276. Now, we cannot, if we want to cap parliament, the committee took the view that we cannot say reduce the number of parliamentarians. Because if you say reduce the number of parliamentarians, we can all guess what will happen. We are all in this country. No political party is going to agree for the constituencies in its stronghold to be reduced. On the other hand, each political party will have very good reasons why the constituencies in its opponent's stronghold must be the ones that must be reduced. So we took the view that it would bring unnecessary acrimony. So let's maintain what we have, but an odd number is ideal. So we can just add 1 to make it an odd number. So it is the reason behind the 277 that the CRC recommends. Now, another contentious issue as a country that we've been dealing with is whether or not members of parliament should also serve as ministers. We know that as under the current constitutional dispensation, the requirement is that majority of ministers should come from parliament. So necessarily, parliamentarians will serve as ministers. We have seen how it has worked. Has it worked well for us? Now, if you look at the CRC, what the CRC recommended was that let's leave the president a free hand to decide whether they want to appoint from parliament or they want to appoint from outside parliament. So what it means is that the president can decide to appoint all from parliament or none from parliament. The CRCC says that no, we agree that we should give the president a free hand to appoint from within or without parliament. However, if you are a member of parliament and you are appointed, then you must vacate your seat. So you make a decision whether you want to be an MP, whether you want to be a legislator, or you want to be part of the executive, but no mixing of the two. We were not unaware of the history that led to this provision, which was that in the Third Republic, the president's budget was not approved. The consideration was then that if you make some of the ministers from parliament, it would make things easier. Our point is we have practiced it. Now, even with the benefit of hindsight, what is wrong with a budget not being passed? Parliament is supposed to serve as a check on the executive. So what is so wrong about a budget failing to pass if there is good reason for it? And for that reason, we have to appoint ministers from parliament. In any case, we've worked with it. And a lot of parliamentarians agree, or there are some parliamentarians who agree that left alone, they are not interested in the work of parliament. The only reason they contest parliamentary seat is because it is a means to getting ministerial appointment.
Right.
In which case, the work of parliament is going to suffer. So we make the recommendation that make a clean break. You either want to be an MP or you want to serve in the executive. If you are an MP and the president decides to appoint you, it is up to you to decide whether you want to accept the appointment. If you accept it, resign.
I'll need us to fast track a bit,
Okay.
and you conclude on this, and then we go to the steps forward.
Okay.
Right.
So so of course then the election of the MMDCs, we recommend that it should be by election, but on non-partisan basis. With respect to the emoluments of Article 71, we propose that just have a predetermined formula, and then after that the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission can manage that formula rather than keep on setting up committees. So they manage like they do for everyone else. And then let me talk about this one too. We also take the view that with respect to appointment of independent constitutional bodies, that it should be by open competition. So open it up, advertise the position, have rules and regulations, pass a legislative instrument, let people apply. Then at least the EC can rest from all the suspicions from the various political device and all of that. We also recommend that when it comes to declaration of assets, don't just declare, it has to be verified and a certificate of verification issued. Now, of course, we have a recommendation on the quorum of parliament as well. So let me go straight to the next step, right?
Right.
So this is a sample of the recommendations that we have. And with respect to our next steps, we are committed to ensuring that the voices of the Ghanaian citizens are central to the constitutional review. We take the view that these are recommendations or suggestions to the people. It is important to have the people agree or disagree or modify whichever way suits them. So what both the president and the president-elect have talked about, we do need broad stakeholder engagements across the country to get the citizens involved and then to reach a consensus on the way forward, what kind of democracy we want, what recommendations we want to go by, and then pursue accordingly. So in short, these are the next steps that we recommend, that it shouldn't just be taken hook, line, and sinker. It should be presented to the people for their view on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clara. And I'll come straight to Oseche Mensah-Bonsu, who has oversight over this, and his ministry propelled all of this. But I also have not forgotten that sometime in 2018, actually the Attorney General, Gloria Akufo, had set up a committee. The Attorney General, Gloria Akufo, has set up a committee that she called the Constitution Amendment Review Committee. I remember that committee had Godfred Dame, Joseph Kwenka, Obi Amwa, you had Anthony Akoto-Ampao of blessed memory, Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh, Henry Taki, Chief State Attorney, you had Heidi Boache, you had several other people who were to do a number of things, review the Constitution, among other things, the proposed amendments, how they were to be gone about. That was in 2018. Then you come in which year, and decide that this is how we have to go. Why is this that important, that it doesn't leave any government?
Thank you very much. Let me first express my deepest appreciation to Madam Clara T. Kesati for what profound work that the committee has done in trying to align and synchronize the various reports that they work with. A huge load that they put into one basket and endeavor to sift, and they produce a very wonderful document for us. As we said, we've lived with this constitution for the past few years. I've gotten to know the various deficits in the application of the constitution. So to some of us, the practitioners, we came to a conclusion that we needed to offer some twists and turns at various provisions. So I remember early 2018, I raised this matter, and with Gloria, who was the Attorney General, and she indicated to me that she agrees and that something ought to be done. It was really ensuing from what we had started doing at the ministry with the expanded leadership at the time. And we had come to some conclusion that we needed, as a way forward, to revisit what had been done by the committee that was set up by Professor Mills. So that's how the whole endeavor got off the ground by the then Attorney General. But independent of her own effort, as I said, we had already begun our own at the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. Unfortunately, along the line, her endeavor fizzled out, and then ours then grew. And then together with my colleagues and compatriots, the Honorable Fuseni Inusa, the Honorable Ben Abdullah, who at the time, the two of them were with the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee. And that's why I so much leaned on them to join me to get this onto the track.
Gloria Akufo's committee was looking to do, if you like, piecemeal implementation.
Absolutely.
So they took one by one and proposed how to go about them.
That was the difference between what we proposed to do and what they set out to do. And so the combination of events is what has been related to by Madam here. And I think she's not even related to all the aspects. For instance, dealing with the executive. I mean, we all acknowledge that the powers and responsibilities vested in the president, too huge, too many. How do you cure that? Is it to submit some of the appointments that the president makes to Parliament for approval so that it becomes a shared responsibility? It's one matter that is outstanding, and we need to make progress, which is already related to the appointment of cabinet ministers to come from outside, the number, the presidential travels, whether once the president travels outside Ghana, he ceases to be a president such that the vice president should take over. And in the absence of the vice president, the speaker also takes over. These are matters that we need to deal with.
She was on the same platform. She was on this same platform. Sorry about this brief interruption. With Anthony Forsing Jr., former president of the Ghana Bar Association, who was also the youngest in the Consultative Assembly that made the 1992 Constitution.
Yes.
And when they suggested a capping of the ministers to 25,
yes,
there was such popular support for it. Then you go for the validation process, and I saw all the senior statesmen, Okujeto, I saw Setepe, the rest of them, Minister Fuseni himself, were all there. And you agree now that it should come to 55 rather than 25.
The reason was that when they suggested 25, it didn't include the regional ministers.
Right.
It didn't include the regional ministers. At the time they had 10, now we had 16. So if you take 16 from the 25, I was suggesting that we can only have 9 ministers.
Okay.
So it didn't include the regional ministers. Now we have regional ministers. And we also recognize that, yes, there are certain ministries that one could do without having deputy ministers. There are some that necessarily require deputy ministers. For instance, a ministry like finance and economic planning. If you have a minister for the ministry who is strong on finance, you require somebody to assist him whose strength will be on economic planning. We are now talking about realigning ministries. A ministry of transportation, for instance, would superintend over roads and highways, aviation, ports and harbors, railways, and such. You're not saying that one person can superintend over all these. So you need an engineer perhaps, who will be in charge of maybe roads and railways, and the other one for aviation and ports and harbors. So there, and then mines and energy, if the ministry should remain like that. The two are different, natural resources. So those configurations would have to be worked out.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that there are some that require deputy ministers.
So you
others
proceed on your
yes.
substantive point, because
now,
their proposal was that you scrap deputy ministers and all of these things.
No. I think
make a point
we have agreed. We have come to some consensus.
You agree that eventually this will be for broader national consultation.
Absolutely.
So the people's views would
matter.
What will matter.
Would matter.
All right.
In fact, we were intending to do after this one, the next step for us was to have some cross-sectional representation to interrogate the issues contained in the report. After which, perhaps we'll lead ourselves to maybe a consultative assembly or whatever. Because, as we said, this constitution was validated by the general populace.
That's right.
So ultimately, it will have to go back to them. And that is what maybe, sometimes we disagreed on the processes and procedures. Some of us do think that we can boss everything together at the consultative assembly level to have a new document, and then we shall have just one referendum on that. If the people approve of it, it then supplants what constitution, and it will cut down the cost.
Right.
But that's something left.
We are talking about the importance of this, yes, and why no government appears to leave the subject.
Yes.
Before I came in with my question. So proceed on your subject.
Yes, and I was talking about, for instance, the executive. Have you looked at the tenure of office of the president under Article 66? He does 4 years, and that's it. Whereas, and that is an entrenched provision. But under Article 113, where there is, the country is involved in war, for instance, Parliament can extend its life by 4 years. But the president, who is supposed to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who is supposed to lead the effort in the war situation, will have to exit. And there will not be any president or vice president, but there will be a parliament. There's a clear vacuum. So how do you cure that mischief? So it was something that also engaged the attention of the NDPC. Madam spoke eloquently about that. The Constitution requires governments to continue with the programs and projects executed by exiting administrations. We're not doing that as much because a party comes with its own manifesto and they think that let's restrict ourselves to this manifesto. Meanwhile, a road is being constructed. Another government comes, he sees that, oh, this road is not my priority. He leaves it. The road construction has gotten to some level. It's abandoned. 2, 3 years, 4 years, we come back. And the nation loses so much.
Because you have to start all over again.
Because you have to start all over again. And it's all because the NDPC, which is so to define a long-term development plan for us, it's not accorded the pride of place that it should. It's not accorded the pride of place because of the composition of the NDPC itself. It comes out as a very politically tainted, body. Today, the NDPC is made up of 47 members. The 47 members, about 32 are ministers and deputy ministers of the NPP administration. They've come up with a brilliant document. Do you think the NDC will have a buy-in? They will come and they will throw it somewhere and constitute their own NDPC. So we keep moving forwards and backwards and not making any progress. You've spoken about what to do with the speakers, the parliament. Ghana's parliament is only 1 out of 9 parliaments in the world whose speakers are not members of parliament. Is it helping us? Or perhaps it's retarding our progress? If the speakers are members of parliament, there is that kind of peer review system. And, Madam was even alluding to the number of 276 as against 277. Now, if the speaker is not to be a member of parliament, then we require the 277. If the speaker is a member of parliament, which some of us believe he must be, because if you have a speaker who is a member of parliament, his attention is on parliament, how to develop parliament. We have had situations where speakers come, they are not looking to develop parliament, but they are self-seekers. Let's be blunt with ourselves. It cannot continue. If you have a member of parliament as a speaker who knows that his colleagues know him, he will submit himself to parliament. So that is how to grow parliament and having situations where resources that are for parliament will be utilized by parliament, the committees of parliament, which are the vehicles for advancing the cause of parliament. Parliament's committees need money to work, and they don't have them. I'm not talking about this parliament. It's been with us. They don't have monies to do that because the speakers have a way of dealing with the clerks. Oh, let's sequester this amount for me. We want to do this, we want to do that, which may not be the priority of parliament. If the speaker is a member of parliament, will look at what is required to be done for parliament. The Council of State. Samson, if you look at the construct of the Constitution very well, with respect to, first of all, the number, it provides for, when we had 10 regions, the president was required to appoint from these 10 regions. Now it's 16. From the 10, the president appointed 11 members, additional. Now they represented all of them came from the regions, the 10 regions. Today we have 16 regions. Can we have 10? The Council of State, or 17. The Council of State, if you look at what they are required to do, you look at Article 90, they deal with bills. You look at Article 91, other matters. The Council of State, by the construct of the Constitution, really is supposed to be the second chamber. Have they been living up to that billing? They haven't. How do we make them proactive and focus on their prime responsibilities? It's something that we should be looking at. We've spoken about capping the number of seats in Parliament. The immunity of members of Parliament is something that we have been talking about. Article 117, that they are immune from service, from the processes from the Constitution. 117, 118. How do you cure that? So these are matters that, and then finally, you notice that whereas Parliament has the function to approve of supplementary budgets where maybe in a particular year funds appropriated for expenditure are proved to be insufficient, or perhaps maybe there's a windfall and we have additional resources we need to spend, where a supplementary budget is placed before Parliament, Parliament can and must approve of the supplementary budget. If you look at the present construct of this Constitution, the main budget, it comes to Parliament, and the Constitution says that it's only for the information of Parliament. It doesn't need the approval of Parliament. How do we address it?
Right.
So there are matters of substance. The judiciary, we need to, purge the Constitution of the position of public tribunals and so on. As for the capping of the number of Supreme Court justices, I know you quarrel with me, But the chairperson would also quarrel with me when I raise these matters. But there are matters that ultimately the general public...
we had 12 institutions, the University of Ghana School of Law.
Yes.
Clara was nominated from that university and she became the chairperson by their own voting. You have the National Commission on Civic Education, the SHRAJ, you have the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, Professor John Asafoye. You had National Media Commission, NMC. You had the judiciary, represented by Justice Yoni Kolendi. You had the Audit Service, Parliamentary Service, Nana Tewia Ochi, Ghana Bar Association, Anthony Forsing, the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General, Alfred Choyebwa, the National Development Planning Commission, the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs.
The current president and the former presidents as well.
Okay.
President Kufuor himself was with us.
Okay.
And from former President Mahama, now President-elect, his office also brought submissions to us. So the whole
I was only referring to the membership of the consultative committee.
Right.
So you submitted your report to the president on Monday.
Right.
And the president was very clear about it, that there were aspects that he too didn't seem to agree with you even before he reads it.
Yes.
But he will make his copious note.
Right.
He was very particular about that and insisted that he would pass it on to John Mahama and propose that there ought to be broader national consultation. What's the point? We are going back and forth. Some see, what's this? With this CRC. And this work is hinged on CRC's work.
Yes. No, I think we are not talking at cross purposes. What we had intended to do after this, where the next step for us from the ministry was then to open it up for a cross-sectional interrogation. I'm talking about cross-sectional representation of the people of this country to interrogate what we come up with. And after that, in fact, we're going to elevate it to a national discourse. Perhaps sustain it for about 1 month, let the people talk to them. And then from that, we have this forum, which was going to last for a while, maybe about 2 weeks, and various issues, various aspects. We're talking about the executive, we're talking about legislature, we're talking about the judiciary, independent governance institutions, and so on. All of them were going to be interrogated by them, from which we thought would be born a consultative assembly or a constituent assembly, however it's so described. So what the president was talking about is about the same thing. And you remember that the president-elect John Dramani Mahama, former President John Dramani Mahama, has already even spoken to it. He says he's going to, his head, that we are doing this, he will submit it to public validation. It's about the same thing. So I think we are
reference there was to the CRC's work, which was
he mentioned
Professor Mills's work.
No. He mentioned when Alan Chemate went to see him.
Right.
But he mentioned especially what we had been doing. And I remember I saw him and I heard him mention that he knows that Chairman Sabunsu is also using a committee to also interrogate this matter. We need to submit the report to, and in fact, he and I had already earlier on had some discussion about what we had been doing. So I think that we are heading towards the same path, and how to bring illumination to it and how to bring it to a closure. But I think, and I agree with him, that further to what we have done, we must have a cross-sectional interrogation of the issues. I never foisted my own position on the committee.
Your position is known, and we have debated it on this particular platform on special editions with constitutional theorists like Mame Mensah Bonsu and the rest of them.
Right.
And many people loved your positions, including your advocacy for the Westminster system.
Yes.
But it does look like even this new proposition at the final work, it's more than what you had expected. Your number of ministers, you were looking for a number of less than 40 or so.
No, I was proposing that. Let me say that, you know, our presidential candidate mentioned the figure 60, and I think that I was instrumental in determining the figure 60. President Mahama has mentioned.
Your presidential candidate talks about 50.
50. I was very instrumental in that. President Mahama talks about 60, and I think it's not too much of a departure. But before then, even before this, the committee had come to that determination that no, 55 is good.
Okay.
So I think that
hold your thoughts there. I'll take a quick break. I'll return and remember that. Thank you very much for your patience, Honorable Ayiko too, and also Oliver Baker, former war, who had a lot of work to do with the CRC. And Yunus Hafsini is right here in the studio, and the chairperson of the Constitution Review Consultative Committee under this administration, Clara Berry Kasati, is also here. There are people who are excited about what you guys are doing, but there are some who also feel that they are looking for a lot more drastic things that today they haven't heard as they heard earlier. It was work in progress. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And we just heard the Honorable Osei Mensah Bonsu. There's a momentum for constitutional amendments. Both president and president-elect, everyone, it's been on their lips. So, John Mahama has also demonstrated commitments or been speaking about it. Let's go to Oliver Baker from War. He was part of the Constitution Review Commission in 2010, which submitted their report a year after. And there was a court process that also stalled that for a while. Oliver says that Mahama got, this is a comment he made, it went viral. He said Mahama got 56% of the popular vote. That was much earlier. 14 out of 16 regions, 68% of the military vote, and 80% of the police vote. Over 2/3 majority in parliament, still possible. A president who is a one-term president and so has no re-election concerns. A person who has presidential experience and so can hit the ground running from day one. Listen, it took 32 years, 8 regular election cycles, and 2 runoff elections for us to get here. We may likely never be here again. So hear me when I say, this is a mandate for constitutional reform. This is a mandate for probity and accountability. Yeah. If I ever saw one, a mandate to build a legacy no one has ever been able to build, apart from Nkrumah. And he said a few other things. Oliver, now the president is coming in to get sort of the process being cooked for him, correct?
There's no question about it. I mean, I think that, particularly on the question of constitutional reform, that we have been on this course for at least since 2008. That there's so much that has been produced within the last few years, 16 years perhaps, that we can say that we have a broad view of the issues on which we have consensus and the issues of which we are still divided. In terms of the constituencies that are mobilized around this issue, we know they are diverse, we know where the positions are, and even those whose positions were still evolving have now gotten to a point of constitutional clarity on which a broad consensus can be formed. Our view is that what is left now is how we can all rally around the incoming president to be able to achieve this. That is important. Now, of course, I'm hearing the Honorable Chairman Sabunsu on the question of revalidating and conversation. I'm a Democrat at heart, and I understand the core. The concern I think a lot of people have had over the years is whether or not it becomes another way of filibustering the process. Because every start and stop, we come again with a reconversation. And the risk is that it never gets done. But we, persons within civil society, some of the political actors as well, ought to be able to consolidate ourselves and build the pressure from ordinary people as well to ensure that this process goes through. There are still certain questions that are still unclear. And I am agreed with the position that says, if we are bundling up all this issue and presenting to the voter, then we are not necessarily being fair because the Dem cannot have an opinion on the individual amendments. I don't necessarily think that the problem is solved by debundling them, because if you put 60 amendment bills before an individual voter, it requires informing yourself over 60 different issues that are themselves complex. I'm also a bit suspicious also about amendments which are tweaking and not necessarily transformative. And I'll give an example that I often hear. This question of, for instance, I think Honorable Chairman mentioned about when the president travels and somebody is in office, it's a dead horse in my opinion. We've gone to the Supreme Court several times on this issue. And at this point, it seems those of us who are on the side of, well, let's not swear another person in, I want to use the opportunity to get one in. If it's going to be a point which will draw us back, let's leave it. But there are key areas of how we deal with our democracy that we cannot ignore. In my view, and which I have not heard talked about, the big question for a democracy like ours is the fact that the power of constitutional initiative does not belong to the people. Meaning that only Parliament and the executive can commence conversations around constitutional reform. The people are left out of the process. If you go to Kenya, for instance, there's the power of the popular initiative, where citizens can mobilize themselves and get, say, 1 million votes to be able to put a question to constitutional referendum. I think that we need to be able to have a process by which we bring the people in and have an initiative to initiate conversations about constitutional reform. It's important. There's also different aspects. And we, for instance, on the 21st of January, Democracy Hub is organizing an event called The Case for a New Constitution, where we are going to be stating our constitutional priorities and also setting out a roadmap around which we're hoping that everybody can coalesce around. So there's ample evidence of things around which we can find ourselves. And it is important that the old divisions that have not allowed us to be able to mobilize ourselves concretely to ensure that this is delivered by the political class can be resolved. My hope is that conversation, those who are on the panel as well, will join us on the 21st of January, which is at the British Council starting from 5 p.m., and that we will then be able to develop together a roadmap for how we consolidate ourselves and move forward. But on that day, we're going to be unveiling a 15-point constitutional reform agenda. Even as we are stating the case that the new constitution is probably the way forward for us, we understand that not everybody is going to get everything that they want in this process, and that we have to be able to find consensus and also understand that we may win some and lose some, but the important thing is that there are certain things on the agenda that we must coalesce around to ensure the new president gets the support to be able to deliver.
So this program that you are having at the British Council, and you are going to lay out your proposals, don't you believe rather that it better fits into the time when perhaps President Mahama will constitute the process to validate the, Professor Fiajo report and also this Claraberry report?
So this is our view. Our view is that the process should not only be left to the executive's timetable or timeline, is that we ought to be galvanizing or creating the momentum that leads into that conversation. So we don't wait for when that happens, but that we start gearing up and start educating and start having conversations that will consolidate at that process at the time in which they do that. So critically now, remember, one of the things that we have done over the past is that we have consistently avoided getting into specific of what the constitutional reform agenda should entail. And we have said that we think that the most important thing is to get everybody around the table to rally the process forward. And so what we have done is be able to usher us into these conversations towards this point. Now, throughout this process, we have been consolidating what we think that consensus can be built around, and that's what we're going to be stating. There's nothing which would enrich the process the president-elect intends to put forward than broad consolidation of processing and also public enthusiasm for it. And that is what we are creating, public enthusiasm ahead of that process. Because our fear is that if we leave it to a timetable that is uncertain, we worry that it may not happen. So let us give him the full support by inviting conversation him and see that, as we say in Ghanaian parlance, our eyes are red for constitutional reform to happen.
Interesting. Let's go to ICO 2 now. I was coming to you about the question why the Constitution review question or debate doesn't appear to disappear from, the table. Why is that? But hold on briefly for me. I understand that some confusion has erupted at the Greater Accra Regional Coalition Center as the parties disagree over the number of polling stations to recollate in the outstanding Dome Kwabenya constituency. James Aveji, are you with us? Hello, James. So our man James Aveji is at the Coalition Center where the NDC and NPP can't seem to agree on how to proceed with the Dome Kwabenya process. Please unmute your mic and do this very briefly for me. What's the problem?
Well, something, just some few minutes ago, there have been disagreements over the number of polling stations to consider in this recollation process. We know that leading to today, what we've been told consistently by the Electoral Commission is that there are 3 outstanding polling stations in the Dome Kwabenya coalition. And so just before the process began, the NPP parliamentary candidate, Eroman Kokwe Jr., raised some objections. According to him, in the dying hours of the coalition in the constituency, just before the chaos erupted, they were left with some 88 polling stations to be collated. And according to him, that the rest of the 88 was done all up to 85 when they, the NPP, were not present before that declaration took place at Dome Kwabenya. And so he was insisting that the EC here recollate the rest of the 88 that was done in their absence. That brought all of the confusion with the parties charging at each other, disagreeing over the process, leading to some banging of table and all of that. But as we speak, that has been calm now. The NDC is insisting that only the 3 outstanding police stations are collated and declared. And so just a moment ago, you may see Dr. Srebo behind me. They went into a brief meeting and then he came back to inform the parties that what has been agreed on is that among the 3 outstanding polling stations, 1 result have been entered on a presidential pink sheet. And so the agreement is that that particular polling station is set aside, they collate the rest of the 2, and then whoever comes second, the result of the outstanding 3 will be added to his result. If that makes a difference in the final result, then they would have to go and do a rerun of the election in that particular polling station, which results have been entered on a presidential pink sheet. And so that's the agreement, and the process is expected to continue now.
All right, thank you very much. So, Oliver, my question, can you respond to that briefly?
If you don't mind,
why is the Constitution Amendment debate never dying?
I don't think it would even ever die, even if we have the Constitution Amendment done. But historically, let's go back to the beginning of the Constitution itself. Because even getting a new Constitution was very divisive and also politically contested. The nature in which that process evolved and the participants that were involved in the process was different. If you recall, the Ghana Bar Association had boycotted the process, even when we put in place the Constitution at the time. The MPP, for instance, at the very beginning, when the party came into being, was clear that it was going to ensure a process for constitutional reform, if not a new constitution, in that place, because it held the view at the time that that constitution was not advanced enough in terms of ensuring a democracy sustaining itself. There were debates about the indemnity provisions of the constitution and whether or not that creates a republic of a rule of law. So, in many ways, as many times as we would have frustrations with the political class, it will generate constitutional demands. As many times as there will be friction between the various arms of government, it will generate constitutional demands. That will be the nature of how the republic evolves. It is one of the reasons why the Constitutional Review Commission looked at the Ireland example and recommended that we should have a standing commission that is consistently filtering these constitutional demands. And when it rates where we have critical mass of support, we put them on the table for referendum on different issues. So that is not going to stop, we must agree with.
A standing commission like the Law Review Commission?
Yes, a standing commission like the Law Review Commission, in that nature, that will be receiving amendments and then educating and seeing the level of which these proposals get a crescendo to be able to see whether we can submit them to referendum. So we must live with the idea that this is not a closed box. And if after 30 years, ideas have been generated that seek to improve the substance of our democracy, then we must ensure there's a process by which they are delivered.
All right.
The current system does not provide an opening for that process. And whether that is through the popular initiative or a standing commission, we must recognize the fact of constitutional amendments. Even the US Constitution has received several amendments, and there's consistent talk of new amendments as we go forward. That is the nature of the constitutional life of every republic.
Thank you. So the Honorable Aikoto is still with us. Thank you once again. So he's not on presently, I understand. If we establish contact with him, we'll continue with him as well. So, look, and I'll begin with Honorable Yusuf Seni on this point. The Democracy Hub, they say they are holding a policy conversation titled The Case for a New Constitution on the 21st of January 2025 at the British Council. Now, I was asking whether the best approach is not to rather wait when the president inaugurates the validation process for them to submit to that process. And Oliver says, no, it's never wrong anyway. Let's do it and let whatever we say feed into whatever gets done.
Yes, so it's never wrong. We build in consensus on the need to have our constitution looked at again. And so it's definitely not wrong. I mean, even the amendments that have been captured in Clara's report will have to go through some work, either by the incoming president or by parliament. And so the process is an ongoing process. What we all agree on is the universal creed that we, the people of this country, having lived with this constitution for 30 years, which constitution is not delivering the promise it made to us in the preamble to create an equality of opportunities and prosperity for all, largely because of the weaknesses of certain institutions in the governmental framework that we have enacted or put in place for ourselves. Think that there are some things that we can do as a people to ensure that the promise given to the people of Ghana in the 1992 Constitution is met. That's all that we're doing.
But there's that school that says that the problem is not really about the Constitution, and that it's bad people that are making a good Constitution bad.
Yeah, bad people make good constitutions bad. And they do that because the framework that will secure that bad people behave in a certain way is not provided. And that's why you are told that constitutions are just the bones. Okay? Now, we must make sure that the framework itself is such that it won't give bad people an opportunity to thrive. Okay? And then we can give you numerous examples. For instance, how can we as a people have an institution of state, the Bank of Ghana, whose actions moves 1 million people into poverty? How can we have that? What checks do we put in place to ensure that that never happens? We have been in Parliament for so long that we know that by the principle of separation of powers, Parliament, whether minority or majority, have to hold government accountable. The executive brings a policy, which policy is being debated on the floor of the House. But a member of Parliament wishing to catch the eye of the executive, the president, will see nothing wrong with the policy, will hear nothing wrong with the policy, and will talk nothing about the policy. Is that what we want as a people? That is why we think that we must give vent, a meaning, to the principle of separation of powers.
For you, what is the place of the CRCC's work, the Claraberry report, in the whole project going forward? Because you have been from day one, the very first day that the ministry invited people, Professor Bochi, I remember I was there myself.
Yes.
So, you know, you were there, Haruna Idrisu, and the debate began about the fact that you can't do a process without recourse to the CRC's work. That's Professor Fiajo's work. You have been part of it from that very beginning to the end. What should be the place of this report going forward?
Your question has been answered by Clarity. We said that we don't need to reinvent anything. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President-elect, has also spoken about it. That we have been caught by time. The CRC report has been caught by time. There are many things that will have to be reinterpreted in the context of the times in which we are. Clarity's committee appreciated that fact and took the Fiajo's report and looked at it, which were the low-hanging fruits. You had the talk about priorities. Mm-hmm. What can we achieve? We realize that the enormity of the tax, as spelled out by the Constitution Review Committee, is said that we cannot, if we mean to go by that alone, we might not be able to achieve our desired goals of amending the Constitution. What is it that we can tweak, amend in the Constitution that will still deliver to us the promise of the Constitution, but within the limited time that we have for ourselves? And that is why the Hair Committee went at length to identify what can be done and how it can be done. The Constitution Review Committee, the missus, was that they had lumped a lot of, and that was why the first committee,
Fiajo?
Sophia Akufu.
Okay, Gloria Akufu's
committee. That was what they came out with. They said, look, the committee that was set up, the Constitution Review Implementation Committee, suggested that we lump all the
56 draft amendment bills for the non-entrenched provisions.
Yeah.
And there were also 41 draft amendment bills for the entrenched provisions.
Now, they thought, no, if you did that and lump them, you will have problems. You will not give the people what democracies are known to give to the people: liberty, choice. What do they want? If you lump them, you rob them of that. That's log rolling, bringing them together as one.
And that argument has been long-standing. I remember one of the IDEG meetings.
Yes.
After the report was submitted, Chairman Sabuns was there at that meeting, and the major concern they raised, I remember Professor
Kwashiga
and Atupare made a presentation.
Yes.
And this was the biggest issue. Whether you lump the amendments up, how are people going to vote? And Professor Kwekwasa was also concerned about that as well.
So that is why, attempts have been made to say that, look, when we are dealing with the entrenched provisions, we must give the people the power of choice, as known in democracies.
All right.
And that also brings into question, what do we do? Do we constitute the parliament, when it's reconvenes, as a consultative assembly to look at all the provisions, come out with, because people, they're going to submit draft bills. Look at the draft bills before they go. We cannot assume that what the committee has done and what bills will be submitted to Parliament for the consideration of both the Speaker of Parliament and the Council of State will be the bills that were presented to the people to vote on. There will be processes.
Okay.
But let's say that the processes start when we all agree, including our leaders, the flag bearer, not flag bearer, President-elect, now agrees that we need to move this process forward.
He said that already.
How do we move? How do we move it forward? There would need to be a committee, just like the Constitution Review Implementation Committee. There will need to be a committee of that nature. And the committee of that nature will spell out how they intend to engage the people to build broad consensus. Mind you, we are trying to look at the framework of government,
right,
and it must concern everybody.
And that should be part of the legacy that President Mahama would have to leave. You remember in the last 2 election campaigns, he has been blamed by his opponents, the NPP, that he sat by and did nothing with the recommendations that were produced by the Professor Albert Fiajo committee. They did an extensive work, 1,000-page report. And I say that is the biggest socio-political data that this country has ever collected. And it was going to waste. And the work was valued at about $6 million US. I'll be right back. We have Aiko Otu now on the line. He will speak and then call them the initiators and the conveyors of the process up to the end. Will have the last word. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And our stellar guest, you've been listening and watching since 8 a.m., having Clara Berry Kaseti. She teaches the law at the University of Ghana. She's also on the board of the Center for Democratic Development, CDD. Oliver Bakavoma, World Constitutional Rights and Policy Strategy Advisor at the Democracy Hub. Inus Husseini, former MP, former Minister, and who was also on the Parliament's Parliamentary Affairs Committee, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee of Parliament. Aiko Otu, former Attorney General and Minister of Justice, leading member of the MPP, Osei Mensah Bonsu, rare here on the show. MP Swame, immediate past majority leader, and he's the man with executive oversight of the CRCC's work. Now, let's go to Aiko Otu for his thoughts on the constitutional review process going forward. Thank you once again. So, do you think sincerely that if you agree that the constitutional amendment should happen, it will ever happen with the divisions we see? Because, as President Mahama said, and we all acknowledge, the entrenched provisions that are being sought to be amended, the executive is an entrenched provision, judiciary entrenched, parliament entrenched provisions. Amending the entrenched provision is so difficult. If you don't have both parties coming together in a consensus, it will never happen. Please unmute your mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I believe that we have worked with this constitution for about 30 years. We've seen the flaws, we've seen the dangers in some of the provisions. Otherwise, I would say that it has served us well. And that if there is a compelling reason why we should have some amendment at this stage, I do not see why we should not have that political will to go through it. It is true that the entrenched clauses might require some referenda. I remember then when we were going to deal with the regions or so, we had to go through this process. The chair, Osei Mensah Bonsu, will remember all the work they did, and then eventually we went for the referendum. So I do not believe that the divisions should be said that it cannot work. If it is sold to the public and they appreciate what is at stake and why we should make certain amendments, I believe we would get through with it.
And when the president on Monday receiving the report says that this must never be done until and unless there is popular support for same, and that it's gone round for people to buy into it. How do you appreciate that has to be done? In what form should such a thing take?
You see, it seems to me that we haven't had the political will as a party to look at these constitutional amendments. Let me put on record that during the manifesto drafting in 2016, I was the chairman of the governance sector. I raised this issue. I said, look, we started something time back, and we are looking at laws and governance in general. So I would wish that we look at it again. It didn't go down well with the then candidates who became president for 2 terms. And you see that for all the 2 terms, we haven't really looked at constitutional amendments again. Regrettably, although it was at the ministerial level that the former Attorney General, I think you spoke about Gloria Kufu and the rest, it ended up getting such a Mensah Bonsu, rather his ministry, to start working on it again. So we have not really, I mean, I would say it as it is, we've not really shown that kind of political will. I don't know whether it was the MPP that, or the government that asked Osachi Mensah Bonsu to look at it and come out with what he did, or that he looked at his own experiences as a leader of parliament at the time, majority leader, and working with the constitution and the difficulties that he felt. So to me, I don't think there are any sharp divisions. I mean, that phase is gone. Let's now come to this new era and sell the idea to Ghanaians and let them understand why we should do it. As you have rightly pointed out, the Fiajo one went round. I did a lot of work. I remember I joined Nana Akufo-Addo and others to go and make a presentation before them, remembering seeing my friend Gabriel Puama sitting there as a commissioner and all that. We were there to make, so they've done extensive work already. This Clara Kasati one, they are telling us that they looked at those that have already been made and didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and so tweaked it for us. So I don't think we need that wide consultations once again, except that the things should rather go back to the people and let them decide whether they want these amendments, to be taken on board.
Right. So do you think that whatever happens, the NDC regime or administration incoming have a fine opportunity at least to take care of the non-entrenched provisions, because they will have the numbers in Parliament to do so? If there are problems with the entrenched provisions where you will need at least, is it 40% of people who can have a right to vote coming out, and 70% of that number voting for the amendment?
30% and 70%.
Well, I think that they've, on 2 occasions, I think 2016, 2020 or so, I've always had it as part of their manifesto that they went back on constitutional amendment. And the president-elect has made it clear that he would go ahead with it. So I will not be surprised, and with their majority in Parliament, 2/3, if they have the 2/3, they should be able to, get, with what we hear, even some of the independent candidates saying that they won't work with them, they should be able to make the changes that they intend to, because it is not only something that they talk about, but it is part of their manifesto. They've been saying they want to do it. So we wish them well.
In tackling the entrenched provisions, actually, the Constitution's requirement is for at least 40% of the persons entitled to vote coming out to vote in a referendum, and at least 75%, not 70, 75% of those people voting in favor of the process, the bill to pass.
Yes.
Did I hear you suggest that there is a bit of some coalescing of, views, and therefore it is not difficult to get a consensus going forward?
You remember when we wanted, I think Osache Mensah can correct me, when we wanted to amend the regions, it went through something of the sort, and we were able to get through for the people to vote for it. So it's all a matter of selling it to the people, letting them understand why certain provisions at this stage are not in the best interest of our country.
Okay.
And once we're able to do that, I believe we can get through.
Okay. From where you sit in a minute, can you tell us, in terms of the capping the ministers and not bringing ministers from within Parliament, what should be the cap? And capping Parliament, the suggestion is that it should be 77. It shouldn't reduce. It should be 277. It shouldn't reduce it. And for the ministers, it should be capped at 55.
55.
Yes.
Yeah, with the ministerial thing, I think we've all been talking about it. In 2016, when we were writing the manifesto, the number of sector persons in that room was very small because we were thinking of a lean government. Immediately after the election and the overwhelming results that came, I think the president then was overwhelmed. And he thought, why don't I maybe sort of reward constituencies and who voted for us. And he changed his mind and he continued adding on to the numbers. That is where we reach, and nothing would make him change his mind. Even reshuffle, he will not bite. So this is nothing new. I think we have all spoken about it, that the number should come down.
All right.
So if it is 55, I think it will have a very large support.
Okay.
As for the parliamentary thing, if you look at how the constitution is drafted, is that after every census or so, you've got to look at the numbers again. I think every 7 years or 10 years we are doing it. So does it mean we keep on adding numbers? It doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
That thing should be cut because they can't even find, as we said to Chairman Sabunso, if the members find place to sit. And they're thinking of going to build new parliaments and things like that. We should stop it somewhere. I support it fully.
Thank you very much, Aiko, to there. So let me come back here so we finish up. So, Clara, do you have faith that your work eventually will bear fruits?
Do I have faith? Yes. And the basis of my faith is the Ghanaian people and what we've heard so far. We've made recommendations, and I always say that recommendations are suggestions. So these are the suggestions that we make for our collective benefit. The people can agree or disagree. And so far, this is not the first time we've talked about them, but so far, anytime we've talked about the recommendations that we've made, it has generally been accepted. It's generally received public support. Even around this table, everybody agrees that we need a cap on ministers. For example, everybody agrees that we need a cap on Parliament, for example. I always
should go.
Exactly. So there is general consensus on the recommendations that we make. It reflects the diversity that was in the committee. So once there is, what really we now need is political will. So once the president-elect is committed to the effort, I believe that for all of our sakes, it would bring at least all the work that has been done before this committee, all culminated in the report that we've produced. And then, of course, we hope to see that going forward, something comes out of it. And if you give me just 30 seconds, I want to mention, even though you did, I want to mention the men and women on the committee and the institutions that they represent, and then to say...
It's been highlighted, so people are seeing it.
Okay.
And they're seeing the names all there. I mentioned some of them. I'll try and see if those I didn't mention, I'll mention them as well.
Okay.
Right. The Honorable Chairman Sabonsu, so you must be sort of retiring a happy person that you led this process that eventually will add to refining the CRC's work and eventually lead to a new, call it a new constitution somewhat?
Well, yes, but it's not a singular effort. Let me also indicate that at the very outset, we try to build consensus. And I think the VOMO raised issue about the involvement of some others. It wasn't about resetting. It was really bringing everybody on board to continue. So the Professor Fiajo-led committee's report is aligned with what Clara T. Kasati has done. It's aligned. I wouldn't want to say that that report is in the belly of this one, no. But it's aligned and it's really encapsulated in that report. So everybody was brought on board at the very beginning. All that we have tried to do, as the Honorable Fuseni Inusa succinctly put it, is to try to improve our governance architecture to be able to deliver so that the people of this country would benefit from the dividends of democracy. As the preamble of the Constitution provides, and I think you try to quote from that we resolved when we had that referendum to give ourselves this Constitution. And we said we wanted to establish a framework of government which shall secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality, opportunity, and prosperity. I wanted to do this in a unified and stable nation. So all of us are stakeholders. I wouldn't say that this is a final product. It cannot be, or it may not be. But I will submit it to the president, and I believe that all of us will rally around it and will continue the process to really consolidate whatever has been done. And the people of this country, as stressed by the president, would have a buy-in. Because after all, this is the first constitution that directly has been approved, or if you like, ratified by the people of this country. They must have the final say-so in the final product. If the final product is going to be a referendum of a reviewed constitution, so be it. So I think that is how I see it. So it's not a joy to myself, but a joy to all the people who really were with me in getting to where we are.
There are those who say John Mahama, one term to do is the best opportunity we can ever have to have this done.
Because he doesn't have any stake going forward. And nobody would accuse him of having manipulated the system to satisfy himself. So I think he has a very unique opportunity to really take us to where we want to get to improve our governance. To improve our governance, and not only just for that, but to ensure that this constitution becomes development-oriented. Unlike, the first instance, it was to stabilize the administration. And Clara sent us through the various hiccups that we have as a nation suffered. Now we are stable. I think we are plateauing. How do we improve on it?
Yeah, Professor Fiajo's, the theme was from a political to a development constitution.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Do you think that if this chance was missed in John Mahama's period, we will not see it again?
I'm no octopus Paul, but I don't want to believe in the first place that we are going to miss the boat. I think there's a lot of goodwill, and John cannot afford to miss the occasion, which is why I'm in alignment with what Baka Vomawo has said, that they want to keep the issues on the front burner. I would want to plead, though, that the first 3 months, he is talking about January, but the first 3 months, the president will have to put in place his cabinet. And Parliament, there's not much time. Parliament then will have to work on approving the ministers and so on and so forth. And then the budget will have to be fashioned for the country. So that the first 3 months will be a difficult terrain, a difficult period. But after that, maybe April, May, June, if he wants to do it, I'll really align with it. except that if it is just to serve as a reminder to him that we want to bring, to build a groundswell of opinion to carry this forward, I may agree with him.
All right.
In terms of the real mobilization, I'll plead with him that perhaps April thereafter will be a much better date.
Great. And he just mentioned what Bakavomawo just said that was going to happen and that they are doing, and that will be at the British Council on the 21st of January 2025. Let the conversations continue in this direction. My guests have been Clara Kolega Berry Kasati, Chairperson, Constitution Review Consultative Committee; Oliver Bakavomawo is Constitutional Rights and Policy Strategy Advisor, Democracy Hub; Inus Hussaini is former MP, Tamale Central and former ranking member, Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee of Parliament. He's been a minister, 2 different portfolios. Ni Ayikoyotu is former Attorney General and Minister for Justice, a leading member of the New Patriotic Party. Osei Mensah Bonsu, MP Swami, immediate past majority leader, and he's the man with executive oversight of the CRCC's work. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. Join me tomorrow on my favorite show.
Current Minister responsible for Presidential Affairs.
Currently Minister of State responsible for Presidential Affairs. And we say he's the leader emeritus. Tomorrow, join me on my favorite show, The Law. That's the weekly legal education that I bring you on Joy News at 2 p.m. together with Mamavi Owusu Abuaji Esquire. We'll be talking about the transition law. So we'll tell you everything you need to know about the transition law and what can be done, what cannot be done by the outgoing and incoming administrations. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for your opportunity. And season's greetings to all of you. Thank you for staying with us all the year.